Hello and welcome to the Wellness Connection podcast with Fiona Kane. I'm your host. Today, I've got a guest and we're going to be talking a little bit about how we need to choose to live regardless of what diagnosis we have or what illness we're living with. Ultimately, we need to choose to live. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And my guest is Sarah Chemaissem. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Fiona. How are you? Thanks for having me today.
I didn't ruin your name too much, did I?
Usually got butchered growing up in school, but no, you did a good job.
I do my best. I think, oh, okay, I know that. And then I go to say it and then I don't know it or I say it wrong half the time. So, we're doing okay. I think I said it okay. It's not too bad.
It's good. It's good considering the beginning of the week as well.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, look, for those who don't know you, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, well, just an ordinary human being, just like everyone else, right? But I work as a strategic psychotherapist amidst many other methodologies we utilize in treatment, like clinical hypnotherapy, but we do it in a strategic way, in a manner of language, utilizing your own purpose of life and what you're good at. And it's just very freelance and a lot of timeline therapy, counseling, just talk therapy, but very experiential, the modalities that I use throughout my work. And I work a lot alongside a lot of one-on-one clients and even couples, and more so with a lot of cancer patients that come through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds interesting. So we did, when we chatted before, we did talk a little bit about cancer diagnosis and about how we could reframe in our minds or change our language in regards to our diagnosis that could support our health. Now, before I go any further, I will clarify in this conversation, we're not talking about just wish yourself to health or don't get treatments or any of that. All we're doing is just talking about the fact that the truth is, and this is something that I have talked about a lot on this podcast, that language does matter. The language we use matters, and how we describe things to ourselves or how we think about things really can make a difference to our experience. So that's essentially what we're talking about here today. But would you like to expand on that a bit, Sarah, in regards to what we can do that can make a difference in regards to those diagnoses?
So when we're talking about diagnosis, they have a lot of similarities in the approach of receiving it from a doctor. So we notice that when we don't have an expectation of something going on or running within us, that's a dis-ease or discomfort or things like diagnosis of cancers, and depending also what stage, the first initial thing that happens to us as human beings, we go into a bit of a shock, right? It's the initial absorption of the information from that doctor. And depending on the approach of the doctor and everything as such, they generally begin the conventional medicine of treating the dis-ease. Now, within our discussion today, we're just going to maybe look at it a bit more in a holistic point of view, but still understanding conventional medicine is one of the basics, and is the fundamental parts, because we cannot let 10, 12 years worth of work be parked on one side, because it's very essential to have within any diagnosis. They do help and help us through the processes. But what tends to happen to some of us, depending on the approach of how we've received the information, because we're in such a vulnerable state of mind with somebody that is trusted so well, we could take the suggestions really deeply. And those suggestions become the wiring of our thought patterns and how we perceive the world, which can create that anxiousness and grow the idea a little bit larger within us, because we're freaking out about something, right? Especially if it's a terminal illness.
Yes.
And it can put us in that stance of, I didn't really consider death at this point in time. Let's just call it, if it was a dramatic disease, something like cancer or stage 4 metastatic as such. And so what my perception is around all of that, there are many other ways to deal with this situation. and to perceive your language and what language you've received, to filter through, the GP and what they've said to you, and what aligns with your inner values in your current state of mind and where you're at in your life, and really to delve a little bit deeper with your thoughts. Are you expanding on what they've said, or have you taken, the chance to do a bit more research to see what else could you adapt and apply throughout the process? But my main goal would be reframing, meaning
Okay.
language, the language you've received and how you've observed it, perceived it, and how you speak about it inside your head, and the language that you give out to the universe or just within yourself when you're trying to adjust to a new dis-ease that's come through. So, and relevantly, the reason why it's so essential and important is the unconscious mind. And for people that haven't heard of that, it's just a subliminal, it's a deeper part of our inner selves, that inner voice, the one the intuition that sometimes we ignore even as such. It doesn't know the difference, Fiona, between what is real and what is not real. And due
Yes.
to that, we build and stack up beliefs which expand what we might be experiencing. And then it hones so deep that we end up having other things that come out from it, like anxiety and depression and these other so-called diseases in mental health, let's call it. So it's very essential to really watch what you say and what you say to yourself, and what do you accept from the information you receive from the outside world, because it does affect your healing journey. It plays one part and parcel of it. It's not the main, definitely not. There's
Yes.
environmental factors, there's food, there's genetics to some degree, there's many things involved.
Mm.
But also one partial part is what we'll be discussing today, is your self-inner talk and language and thoughts and
Mm.
reframing and how to go beyond that.
Yeah. Okay. And so if you give me examples, so say I have just received a diagnosis, and say I'd received a diagnosis like a stage 4 metastatic or something, which is, pretty much the worst diagnosis from a cancer point of view. What obviously initially, like you said, there's shock, and I feel like, and personally, like what I say to my clients, anyways, it is okay in the beginning when something happens to you to have the feelings that you need to have and to process those feelings. And if you feel like, oh my God, why did this happen to me? Or like whatever it is, like that's all fine. There's no issue with that. It's essentially, though, it's kind of moving onwards. I suppose it's then what you do, and it's then how you reframe things or how you look at things. So, what would you say to someone who had that sort of diagnosis? What's the sort of starting point for them, or how can you maybe just make it a bit clearer of what we mean by this?
Sit with it for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Sit with those emotions that you just discussed. Don't be
Mm.
afraid of them. Sit with the shock,
Yes.
then sit with
Yes.
the grief of
Yeah.
learning something new, right?
Mm.
Sit with the anger and the frustration and the blame, but
Mm.
don't sit there too long,
Yeah.
because it turns into a vicious cycle, and then you'll be in the victim mentality. And then that victim mentality only grapples you deeper instead of actually embracing where you're at in this very moment. It
Mm.
draws you backwards instead of keeping you in this very moment. So the first step is sit in it. But then some
Mm.
people would ask, how long do I sit in it? Or sit in it for a day, a two, give yourself maximum 7 days. Sit in the whole process of absorbing this information, and then look outside the window and
Mm.
start thinking beyond that. What do I want? Just because I've had this diagnosis, it doesn't make it who I am right now. It's just another part and parcel of me for this very moment. Whether I can heal from it, reverse it, or cure it, that's one part. But let me work in, what do I want right now in life? Maybe it's a calling for you just to sit down and notice, have you been living to die, or have you been dying to live? Maybe it's one of
So
those alarm bells to just process, where am I at? What do I want to do? Who do I want to become from this? What changes could I adapt? Who haven't I called lately? Who are the people that I want in my life? Who are the people that I want to filter out of my life, or I want to spend more time with? These are all things that naturally we should be thinking about day to day. But unfortunately, due to the rat race that we live, especially here in Sydney, we park those ideas, and we get so exhausted that by the time the evening comes, we just want to switch off and unwind. So we don't do those calls, and we don't, create those connections. But then when we get a diagnosis, it's that pause. It's that forced pause to reflect. So I would be sitting with that, sit with the emotions, and then see, what do you want? And how have you been living? And
Yeah.
who is it that you want to start to connect with? Because regardless of a diagnosis, my belief system is nobody can tell you when you're going to die.
Mm. Yeah,
It's
nobody knows for sure.
no, you don't
Yeah.
know when you are going to be birthed and when you're going to leave.
Yeah. And that's actually an interesting, that's a conundrum or something I've talked about with a friend of mine before is uh, there's the whole idea of, okay, there's an ethical issue here, right? So the ethical issue in medicine has always been you should tell people the truth because, that obviously they need to plan and they need to know how dire things are and whether or not they should take your recommendations, blah, blah, blah. So I totally get that and I totally understand there's an ethical question there. And then once upon a time they didn't tell people and then they didn't get the opportunity necessarily to change things and now they do tell people. But then there's a whole level of, okay, so ethically, if you say it's right to tell people, and I'm not arguing that it's not, this is just one of those like dilemmas, I think. But the problem is then if it's ethical to tell people and you tell people, well, essentially you are kind of making up a number and you're making it up based on obviously what you might have seen. X amount of people live for this long and X amount, but obviously they use the data and then they just project based on
It's an
that.
observation. It's not the
But
truth.
once they say a number, the problem with that is a little bit like in the Indigenous culture in Australia, there's like pointing the bone at someone. It's like you point the bone at someone and then they go away and die, sort of thing. So it's almost like this. Once you believe, once you believe that. So if someone gives you a X amount of time, X amount of months, or whatever, does that happen because you believe it because you've now taken that on,
That's an
or
that's a
you
very good.
know?
That's an extremely good question, because if you
Yeah.
look at it, and if you look at the studies through Harvard University or any study for that matter, when they do surveys for the people that have been prescribed a timeline for their
Mm.
expiry date, which nobody has the
Yes.
right to do that, quite frankly, because it's something not with us, right? But
Yes.
unfortunately, the medical system has chosen to take that on board as a responsibility. But then if you
Mhm.
look at the percentile and the average of people that have survived beyond the expiry date that has been prescribed to them, or the ones that have passed away during that time and they were correct, there is
Mm.
a difference in thoughts and
Mhm.
beliefs.
Okay.
The ones that lived beyond that said no to the
Mm.
limitations a human being put on them, and
So
said
they
no,
didn't accept it.
no, that it was not accepted as a suggestion. Hence why at the beginning I was discussing it's you and your luck sometimes which doctor is giving you the information, because some
Mm.
doctors are very blunt, some are very compassionate in how they say things. Well, they give you the positive first and they say, oh, but
Mm.
like Dr. Steve Bierman is a classic example of this, and he's had a lot of cancer patients. If people don't know him, read his book. It's phenomenal, right?
So
um,
Dr. Steve
Steve
Bierman, did you
Bierman,
say? How do
yeah,
you spell that?
Steve, and Bierman, Beirman, Bierman.
Okay.
Brilliant, doctor. I'll give you the name of the book. I think it's Pills and Potions. It was called something like that, or Healing Through Pills and Potions. He said something really magnificent. Now he was working in the emergency department for many, many years, and they had a patient that ran through that was having a heart attack, and then they needed to put her in a theater room to operate, but they didn't have a theater room available at that time, right? Simultaneously, a similar incident was happening in a room next door to her, right? So this is
Mm.
in the ER. And he heard the doctor in the background. So this lady's stable right now. He heard the doctor saying, if we don't get her a theater room, this woman's going to die right now in the ER. Now,
Mm.
Dr. Steve had an observation. This is the first time where he awakened to hypnosis and the whole nitty gritty of the unconscious mind, right? He noticed that on the monitor, of the heart monitor, she started to have high palpitations. The doctor didn't speak in front of her, but she heard the conversation. So her unconscious mind took on board a suggestion behind the curtain.
Mm.
And that was his first observation. Now, the one next door didn't hear anything like that, and she was fine. That one survived. That one ended up having
Yes.
another heart attack in the ER, in that emergency department. And they ended up putting her in a theater room and everything. He ended up going to learn about hypnosis and NLP and language just to understand what was going on. Over the years, he ended up applying this to his practice, And when he did have a cancer patient, he learned something. He learned two things, visually and language, as a doctor. Now, not all doctors have this skill. The first thing when he comes to give a diagnosis, because it is valid, it is there, it is the truth. It's conventional medicine, and it's not a lie. He uses his hands, Fiona, and he says, you are a part of this side of people of a diagnosis, but I have seen 2% of people survive, or 98% survive, right? So it's part and parcel of observation in the mind, visually and language. He's getting the person to be naturally reframed. What do you want? I can't put an expiry date, but according to the percentiles that we've seen over the years, this is only a survival rate of 6 weeks, but I know, and I wonder if you'd surprise yourself and be the 2% or whatever it is, or 98% of people that would survive this. And so that's another suggestion. Now, not all doctors give you this approach, right?
Yeah, so he's actually just reframing it. So he's telling the truth,
He's
but
saying
he's reframing it in that you could maybe be one of the ones in the percentage of people who survive this.
exactly. And so he'll
Yeah.
speak about the positive, and because being a doctor using the ethics, they have to deliver their information. That's a part of their job, right?
Yes.
So he'll deliver it. This is the rate, but he won't deliver the rate at the beginning. He'll deliver
Okay.
at the end. He'll
Yes.
reframe. And he goes, I've noticed that every patient I have had, almost every, from what he's told us, right? And I've done a few of his courses and read his book. He hasn't had any death.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Yeah, obviously the mind's a big part of this. Clearly, I mean, I don't know. I haven't read the papers or seen the evidence, but going from what you said. But yeah, I do know that the mind has a lot of power, because even I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I talked about there was a really big study done on stress, and the study was done. It was like over 30,000 people, I think it was. It was a lot of people, and essentially what it did is it asked people at the beginning of the study if they'd had stress in the last 12 months. And so they put people in the category of people who've had high stress, people who've had moderate stress, and people who've had low stress. And then what they did is they monitored and then they asked them if they think it was affecting their health. And so they got them to say, and it's affecting my health, it's not, blah, blah, blah. And essentially at the end of the day, when they basically just looked at data of people's health outcomes and whether or not they died over this sort of long period of time. And what they found is the people that had the highest stress but didn't think it was affecting them were the people who lived the longest.
So belief system.
Whereas the people who had the highest stress and did think it was harming them, they died sooner.
So what does that mean, Fiona?
Yeah, so what they came up with was that the belief that the stress is killing you is what is killing you, right? People died from the belief that the stress was killing them. So I totally get what you're saying. I don't have the data in front of me of what you're talking about, but I've seen the data for the stress. And so I do know that the mind is really powerful. And yes, if you say that this is killing me, then you're probably right.
Almost every time, because regardless of a diagnosis or not, we are all heading that way.
Yes.
The sooner we accept the idea, the sooner we can live to die as opposed to dying to live.
So can you just clarify, when you say live to die, die to live, can you just explain that a little bit more detail?
So I usually use it as a metaphor with my clients when they come through and they're feeling very suicidal or really in a depressive mindset, and they can't seem to come out of it. And I question them a lot. And I use my hands as well. And I always say, like, pay attention to my hands. You've entered this world without permission. You didn't ask to. You're going to leave without distinction. You didn't ask to either. Okay. So there's two ways to life. So the entering and the exiting. Now there's two types of people that they have entered and accepted life and are living to die. So they're driving the right way. So they're driving towards the end, but they're fulfilling their needs. They're satisfying whatever it might be, if it's a career or building a family, building connections, leaving a legacy, whatever it may be. So these people are living to die. They're with the flow of life. They're accepting the processes and challenges. But then you have the opposite people, which are walking or driving the opposite direction of the right way to drive, is dying to live. So it's a struggle because you have all the cars that are living to die and the people that are driving against that. it's a big you end up with more challenges because you're finding more obstacles, because you're focusing more on the negative. You're noticing more of the darker colors than the lighter colors. You're not observing everything around you except what is in front of you. And that's a very focal position to be in. It's very tunneled. And to be in a tunnel position, you don't have any chance of possibilities of more doors and opportunities to come out of, right? So that's a very depressive way to look at things, let's just call it. Hence why they might be looping in chronic stress or anxiety, which is fear, or depression, which sits in a lot of sadness of an old challenge. But that's behind you. But you're dragging what is behind you to in front of you, but you're also driving the wrong direction of the right way. And it's a choice. And I get them to observe, where are you? How long have you been living? Are you 20, 30, 40? Observe that. Have you really been living in the now, this present moment? Because yesterday doesn't exist anymore, Fiona. Quite frankly, tomorrow we may or may not live. So what are we doing today now? This is what is essential for the possibility of tomorrow. It's a possibility. It's not a certainty. And just knowing that we can adjust to the uncertainty of not being certain of tomorrow, but being certain enough that we could live to tomorrow, that we have the motivation and drive to live in the now for tomorrow, pushes us and our perceptions and our thought patterns. And now we're not dying to live anymore. We're living to die. We're in the moment. And the past no longer defines who we are and where we're going to moving forward. And this helps reframe that perception. Well, no, I've been dragging my past along with me and I've always worried about death. But worrying about death is like worrying twice. How about if you didn't die tomorrow and you're worried about it today? What was the point?
So what's the point in worrying about it? It will happen when it happens, but why obsess about it now?
And if you worry about it right now for tomorrow, Fiona, and then tomorrow comes and it doesn't happen, you just worried unnecessarily. And then let's just say something does happen, a challenge or something that you're worried about. You're worried about it today, and in a week it happened, and then you worried about it then. You've just doubled up your worry. You've stacked up on unnecessary stress. What's the point of that, right?
And you see this a lot. And look, I just want to just again say, in this conversation and when we have this conversation, there's no judgment about what people do and don't do and what they choose to do or how people respond to their diagnosis or any of that, because it's not me, it's you, and everyone has their individual experience, and I don't want to make any judgment on anyone. So none of this is meant to be a judgment. We're just having a discussion about what we've observed either in clinical practice or in studies or things like that, or things that might be useful for people, but in no way is this meant to be a judgment. In saying that something I have observed is that I do see it in people, and not even just cancer diagnosis, I just mean in general. There are people who, as they get older, there are people who shut down a lot earlier in their life. There are people who, and I heard someone say in a speech where someone said this at the end of the speech the other day about how people kind of almost die in increments because they kind of closed down earlier in their life. And you do see that with some people where, and it's probably more often people who are living in their head about what might happen or stressed or whatever it is. But these people, they close, they make themselves smaller. They make their lives smaller. And it's kind of like they kind of almost sit down and wait to die, but they might do that 10 years before, 20 years before, 5 years before, 6 months, whatever it is. And it's really, really sad to see when people do that. And a lot of that is what's going on in their mind.
I'm going to expand on that, if you don't mind. A very strong observation over the course of 12 years, roughly. A close friend of mine, she was first diagnosed with breast cancer. She was the initial starter for me to go on a hunt and research to understand cancer so well, and hence why it's one of my research parts of my work and field and the people that I work with and so forth. The first observation was over the years when I started to do a lot of research and write a lot of notes to watch what was going on. She made a conscious or unconscious decision, you could say, at the time. Her dad had passed away. Once her dad passed away, she was very close to him at the time. This is just one amongst many things, and everybody has different factors involved. But this is just one observation over one human being. There was a close friend, and her father had passed away, and her son was only 6 months old, and she was in a second marriage, and she was unhappy that her father had passed away. Then her husband started to, let's just say, not treat her fairly, and so within 3 to 4 months, she had a diagnosis of breast cancer. Now, I remember the conversation so vividly, like as though, Fiona, it was yesterday when I was on the phone and she was crying when her dad passed away in that moment, 4 months before her diagnosis, and she had a 6-month-old boy. She told me, I don't want to live anymore.
Mm.
She said, I don't know what's the point of living once the thing that meant so much to me has been taken away. So that was her style of dealing with grief, right? But unconsciously not recognizing her language.
Yes.
I don't want to live, Sarah. I don't want to do this. Now, 4 months later, she was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer and all throughout 4 to 6 of her lymph nodes down left side of her body. So she made a conscious decision to go into surgery. That's fine. She went into surgery. She began chemo, but they also told her something very interesting because it was very deep into the lymph nodes close to the heart that you've got 6 weeks to live. And I recall that conversation because I was sitting there with the doctor. And I told him that's absolutely not acceptable, and we're not accepting that suggestion. And I took her out of there. I was really frustrated. I was very young at the time. And I walked down and I go, listen, we're not accepting that suggestion. We're not accepting it as a suggestion. No, nobody has the key to the unknown, right? I go, but you've got a newborn. He needs you. And she looks at me and she goes, but I miss my dad. That was her response. With that, it's like almost, you could say in this case, a manifestation. I'm not saying this is not all cases. This is just one scenario.
Yes.
And I go, but your son needs you. And so within 6 weeks, she began treatment with the chemo, and she passed the 6 weeks. And she was in remission within 3 months. Miraculous remission, right? Because her son is what she wanted to stay around with. 5 years in remission, it came back. Now, the time it came back, she was having a lot of troubles with her partner, a lot of heavy troubles. And she wanted to leave that relationship, but she was carrying shame. I don't want a second divorce. So what was the exit strategy unconsciously for her? It was cancer. She ended up with passive aggressive cancer again. They called it metastatic. Went into remission within 12 months again. She was looping. And then I sat down with her one day because I was treating her during that process and teaching her about, it's not just the mind, it's also food, environment, the people. There's so many things involved in anything that could happen to us. It's our belief systems and what we want and what we don't want, right? And I told her, you're not doing a great job in dying. And she looked at me, she goes, what do you mean? I go, well, you want to die, but you've boxed yourself in a prison that hasn't brought you to the conclusion of what you're after. Because you don't have the key to the unknown. The only way that life could end is suicide, and that's not acceptable. Right? And she sat and she bursted into tears and she goes to me, you are right. I've been attempting to die by creating this ease without consciously realizing. She goes, now what do I do to get out of it? So she had a limiting belief and she recognized it. So we did a lot of hypnosis. And then she ends up with cancer in her uterus. We reversed that before they did the surgery. She didn't have it anymore. And then at the end, she passed away March 16 last year. But she was cancer free. She didn't have cancer anymore. But she was unhappy. And the only thing was her body started to shut down in every way due to a lot of treatment and radiation and all of that. That it's a very rare, it's a unique case. It's a unique case. And I recall before she passed and before she lost her language and her words those few days, and she was like, just take care of my kids. I'm happy to go.
Yes.
She was ready, right?
She was ready.
She was ready. But then I've had other people come through, which I'm not going to share too much detail, and they didn't want cancer to take and grapple their life. They're like, no, I've got more to live for. I want to hold on. And they've gone into miraculous remission and moved past that, utilizing conventional medicine, treatment of chemo and whatnot, and some radiation in some cases. Some cases went full holistic. It's a choice at the end of the day. And some utilized holistic treatments like hypnosis and the reframe. Where am I? What are my limiting beliefs? You don't create dis-ease. Your body just keeps score, according to Bessel van der Berg. So I don't know if you've read his book, The Body Keeps Score, but he discusses the anchoring of the challenges and thoughts that we have gone through without choice, sometimes gets held into the body. And similar to Louise Hay's work,
Yes.
it gets attached to certain organs in the body or parts in the body, which then impose and show up as a dis-ease, a diagnosis. And so it's up to us to sit down with that and see, how do you want to unpack it? And it's not always the case. There is many other factors. This is just one part and parcel, in my personal opinion. These are two different people, perceptions similar, but my opinion is there's other factors. There's environment, there is food, there is, seriously, who you're hanging out with. High vibrational people, low vibrational people, which is your
Yes.
environment. And your belief systems, your traumas, have you cleared them? Have you worked on them? Are you happy where you're at? Realistically, what happiness might mean to you, which is contentment, really.
Yeah, you're right. There are a lot of factors, and this is just one of them, and we're talking about one of them. And one thing I have certainly seen is I see this a lot, and I myself included. I have to have an awareness of my language sometimes as well. Is that in people when you get to a point where with carers? So for me, it's caring of older people. Like I was caring for my mother before she passed, and I've been caring recently for another relative, and you see a lot with carers. I hear them say things like, "This is killing me." Will die before they do. And that I hear a lot of that language, and people sort of say it jokingly, but sort of jokingly and sort of not. And I've seen it when people do say this a lot, how they often pass not long after the person they were caring for. And I've often wondered how much of their belief that it was killing them and that they wouldn't that they would go for. I would just wonder how much of that belief contributed to what happened.
I know that there has been a lot of studies around that, and it's been growing a lot more increasingly with the younger generation to find out understanding the mind a lot more deeper. But a classic scenario of what you just explained. I'm also a carer for my mother, and recently she's got glaucoma, right?
Mhm.
But growing up, she always discussed that I don't want to see this anymore. I don't want to see this anymore. And then she ends up with glaucoma under the knife. So she was in a surgery. And she ends up with the rare side effects of the surgery and ends up with glaucoma moving forward. And I
Mm.
tried to reframe her and everything, but she's very stubborn, elderly woman. She doesn't want to. She's not happy. She's gone through a lot of trauma herself. And
Mm.
it's unfortunate to be a part of witnessing that, big portion of that growing up. But recently, which amused me, she actually asked me a question. So recently we had a reunion with one of my siblings, and it's a step sibling. So she was a part of a big chapter in his life. When he was sitting there, she wasn't herself, Fiona. She wasn't herself. When he left, I felt she was very disorientated. And then she approached me. She goes, something happened to me. I go, what happened to you, Mum? She goes, I went completely and utterly blind in that moment. I could not see. That's why I was very withdrawn, trying to hear, but I wasn't able to see. So her balance, she lost balance in that conversation. I go, well, I asked you, did you want to sit in this confrontational moment? Did you want to see your stepchild, my brother? I go, did you want to sit? And she goes, I did. I did want to sit, and I did want to see him. I go, Mum, what's your language? At a conscious level, you did, but did you at an unconscious level just tap into that gut, the third brain, your intuition? And
Mm.
she goes, well, I didn't want to see and be reminded of my history. I
Mm.
go, hear what you
Okay.
said. I didn't want to
I want
see
to
and
see.
be reminded by my history. I didn't want to see.
Mm.
So you reminded her of my father, and he looks very similar, and it triggered all her traumas, right? And I'm
Mm.
like, Mom, do you realize what is happening? You didn't have congruency. Your conscience wanted something, but your unconscious, which hadn't healed because you've never gone to therapy and you've chosen not to because you're so stubborn,
Mm.
right? There wasn't a congruency. So because there was a separation and a gap, it showed up because you don't want to see the
Yes.
past. And it showed up in that way. And it was very dramatic. And you couldn't see. I go, but are you seeing right now? She goes, yes. But as soon as I was speaking to you about it, I started to feel very blurry. Are you picking up on the cues? Language, language, language. It's so essential. It's so important. And I go to her, Mum, reframe your words. Well, in the car, I was driving her. I go, reframe it. Say, I noticed that I didn't want to see, but I'm going to choose to see through this. Because at the end of the day, he's not my husband. He's my stepson. And when she
Yes.
started to learn that language in the car, we had a 20-minute drive and I was teaching her and she was very emotional. And she goes, I'm seeing clearer again. So her vision was coming on and off, Fiona, momentarily in the car.
Yeah.
My kids were witnessing this.
Mm.
And she only sees in one of her eyes more so than another. What does that mean? Right? The
Mm.
meanings that we're giving to the language that we're using is so essential. So we've got to watch our steps. We've got to catch ourselves. I don't know. Have you heard of Jose Silva?
No.
Jose Silva created the Silva method, which discusses a lot of language and reframing, similar to NLP, but he had a lot of people can go and do his course in New South Wales. There's one teacher that runs it. You find it
Mm.
online. But he talks about language, 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 language. Once again,
Yes.
limiting beliefs created by the words that you speak. So if you and he created a model, and I'll give you this, and this is a tool that people can take away today. The moment you catch yourself saying, I can't hear this anymore, I don't want to see this anymore, oh my God, I feel like dying, I'm dying today, or I wish I could have a break from work. Listen to all these
Mm.
words. You turn
Yes.
around and reframe, cancel, cancel. I'm just exhausted. Hence why I don't want to go to work. I'd like to have a timeout, holiday, not break, because break means you're going to break a leg and you still don't have your annual leave, right?
Yes.
So cancel, cancel. You just reframe it, and you
Yeah.
build on that and you stack on that, and that's something you can do every day. It's very light. People can hear it when they hear that language and they've done the course. They'll know that you're doing Jose Silva's work, which is Silva method.
Mm. Yeah. So, and what you said there is like reframe as well, because what you're not advocating for lying or making things up. You're actually just advocating for clarifying things and saying the truth. Because it's the same as when people define themselves by their disease or by their problems. So one of the things I talk a lot about is with my clients is emotional eating. Right now, I could refer to myself as an emotional eater, or I could refer to myself as someone who sometimes emotionally eats. There's very different energy around those two things. Now, while it might be accurate to a certain extent, an emotional eater isn't who I am. It is a behavior that I do sometimes. And if we make something who we are, then it's very hard to fix that, because we can't necessarily, well, we might feel like we can't change that, or we're not able to change that. But when it's something you do, when we're able to separate it, something we do or something we experience from who we are, it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
So in that format, language really matters as well. So language really does make a big difference. But also in what you were talking about before, in regards to, if people like they don't want to see, or whatever the language is. The other study that I think of is there's a big Harvard study, and I think it's the longest study on longevity. It's been going for 100 years or something. And this study, what they found was that they were looking for what's the key to longevity, and they were sort of, is it someone's like cholesterol level, or like what is it, right? And what they found is that it was relationships, and they found that it was having relationship, particularly your main relationship, your partner or whatever, with someone who has your back, someone who you feel you can trust, they have your back, you feel safe with them. Not necessarily someone you never fight with or whatever, because that's just not realistic because we're human, but but just someone who has your back, as opposed to say someone, like what they found is that if you were in a relationship that was a combative relationship, like a nasty combative relationship, where someone was undermining you, or you were in danger psychologically, physically, whatever it is, you are more likely to die sooner. You are more likely to get Alzheimer's or like some sort of dementia.
Forgetfulness.
And so essentially what you're doing is, like, if you're living in this unsafe environment, what is happening is you're withdrawing from that, either just mentally and just shutting down, getting dementia, or actually passing away. And so you're more likely to survive and keep your faculties when you're in a relationship where you feel safe and where you feel someone has your back. And again, how powerful is that in those cases it was about their environment of who they were with and how safe they felt in that environment. And again, that shows you how powerful it is, and whether or not there were certain things they said to themselves, or whether or not they just felt unsafe and so they shut down and pulled away. But you can see the different ways in which we can shut down, or we can use language to shut ourselves down, or we can talk ourselves into things that sooner than we need to, or that we don't need to at all, or that simply aren't true, but we make them true because we create it so.
It's Fiona, it's the unconscious idea.
Mm.
And if we don't, as I said earlier on, and as we discussed earlier, there's multiple factors. Yes, there's food and nutrition, 100%. That plays one part, large parcel, because this is the faculties within your body that's filtering through things that you're eating, whether it's got pesticides and whatnot, if it's not organic. That's a whole different scenario, right?
Yes.
And the other part and parcel of it is the environment. The people that you're hanging around with, the people you're connecting with, do they have a lot of control factors over you and who you are as a character? And the environment that you grew up in initially, the conditioning, the programming that has brought you to who you are right now. People are not their behaviors. You know, the actions and the things and the styles people are delivering is based on the conditionings from history, right? And then that creates the invitation to gravitate and invite similar people back, and they call it trauma bond, in the current environment as you get older. It's because of the old conditioning belief system. So the one strong factor was the environment. And then you have other parts, the externalized part of your environment, your next circle. What's that? The socioeconomics, so the people outside of that, your work. What happens after that? The global aspect. Are you watching the news? Because there's only bad news in the news. That's the facade, right? And they're only honing in onto what? Fear, fear, fear. What happens to you unconsciously, being wired to see fear? If you go down a level and then you see the environment of your work, if it's a circus that you're working in, there is a lot of control and power in there, and you're not finding your safety zone. And then you hone a bit more deeper in, and the relationship is toxic. And then you hone in onto your food, and then you tell me that I've got eating habits. Well, look at the whole outside in. Go back into the root. What was happening at the first early conditioning? What were the belief systems that were installed in you that you haven't maybe confronted, sat with, let go, and just presented them as it's okay, we can deal with this? Like any child that has a tantrum, you've got two options. You sit with them and you comfort them and give them the safety so they can go past it, or you can neglect them, and then over time they feel that that neglect means I'm not going to get attention, so then they withdraw, they go inside their world, they create that bubble, and that eventuates into dis-ease. A classic scenario of this, which a lot of people can watch on Netflix, I'm not sure if it's still on there, but it's the blue and red zone. The people, the longevity of life. About the blue zone, have you watched it?
I've watched some of it. What are you talking about in regards to it? Just so you can trigger my
So
memory, because I remember looking at the nutrition side of it, but what were you talking about in
the
particular?
longevity of life, how you can reach the age of 90 without disease, without
Yes.
anything, the connection that you're in, the nature,
Yeah.
the
It's
grounding,
all of the things, yeah.
breathing, the exercise. So the oldies
Yes.
over there in Greece live in a village, but they're always walking uphill.
Yeah, yeah. I talk about that a lot actually, that it's not just what you eat, because when we look at like the Mediterranean diet or whatever, people think it's only about the olive oil, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with the Mediterranean diet or the olive oil. But yes, exactly what you said. When you look at those zones, the people usually have connection. They're part of a community. And they have that till they die as well. Like they're not they're not often a nursing home somewhere,
They're not
silly old so and so that nobody listens to. They're actually a part of the community that's important and respected, and people are interested in what they have to say and see them as a wise elder. And they are usually working, or if not working, still very physically mobile right up until they die. So they're out, like you said, in Greece, they're walking up those hills like mountain goats. They've got those hills that they walk up, or they have their olive groves that they tend to, or they've got the rice paddies that they tend to,
all
or
the
they're milking the cows, or
they're milling
yeah,
flour by hand.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not a machine.
Yep, yep. So they are very, very physically active, usually doing something. They're involved in their community. They are expected somewhere. They're needed somewhere. They have purpose, and so there's all of those things. And then when you look at like the how important it is for stress to be sort of part of a community and to be needed and to have purpose. And if you're usually they're places where they will eat, and the food, when we get back to the food, it's usually it's local food and it's real food and it's usually ancestral food, the food that they've been eating in that community for thousands of years or hundreds of
Yeah.
years or whatever it is. And often when they do eat, it is like a family or a community thing, and it's a slow thing, and they prepare it together and then they eat together, and it's like they're not sitting in front of the news
I don't have TVs,
while
Fiona.
they're eating their microwave meals. So yeah, all of those things make a difference. And that's actually where when I think of there was someone I interviewed on this podcast a few months ago. His name is Hazem, and I can't remember the number of but I'll put in the show notes, I'll put a link to the episode. I can't remember the exact episode number, 70 something, I can't remember now. Anyway, he's a really interesting man, and it's really worth listening to the episode. And he's been dealing with sort of cancer diagnosis for many, many years. And I did check in about a month or so ago, and he's still got some really major challenges happening there. But what I would say, and he's had like over 50 spinal surgeries, and like really. He's really struggled and had challenges with his health for a really long time. And he's to the point now where when I spoke to him, I'm not quite sure what's that now because he's had a few surgeries since then. But when I spoke to him, he was, I think he called it triplegic, where he only had the use of one hand, but not the rest, or like he's not his other arm or his legs. And he what I noticed when I spoke to him, as opposed to when I've spoken to other people who might have some really harsh diagnoses or that kind of dealing with those things, is he had such a strong sense of purpose. So what he was doing, and he'd had everything taken away from him because he was a fighter pilot, and he lost his career as a fighter pilot because he lost use of his legs. And it happened while he was in the air. Actually, he had to land the plane without the use of his legs, and then took him an hour to get himself out of the plane when he landed. And so I mean, getting to the point where you could become a fighter pilot, I mean, the level of excellence and dedication it takes to get that, and it was just taken away from him, right? And then he studied law, and he worked as a lawyer within the defence. But then later on, more recently, what he's been doing is he's been advocating for people with disabilities, and he's been advocating for them to get the services they need and the wheelchairs they need, and really fighting for really very really important causes and really important situations where people need even just basic, like I think there was one person who couldn't get, like this person was quadriplegic, and they gave them a wheelchair or something that had hand controls. I was like, no, this person needed chin control. So even just like basic things like that, you wouldn't realize it, but apparently you've got to fight for some of those things because the people who push papers somewhere don't understand the reality that those people are living in. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is he had such strong sense of purpose. As far as I'm concerned, based on the information that he gave me about his health, he's like been living on fumes for years, but that's it. He's just got such strong sense of purpose that he has survived for years and years and years and years,
Interesting.
where frankly, I don't think I would have. And that's, again, language, but
Cancer.
based on what what he's told me, I'm just like, oh my God, how do you survive? But I think it is because he has such a strong sense of purpose and a strong sense of what he's here for and what he's on this earth for
Yeah.
and what he needs to achieve. And he's got such a long list of things to achieve that I think that is what's keeping him alive.
And you're right. You're right, because
Yeah.
I've seen it happen over and over with many people, not just him.
Yes.
Multiple stories that we can utilize as examples of that.
Yes.
Because what I've noticed over the years, if you wake up without a sense of purpose, who are you in that morning?
Yes.
And who are you for who? If it's not for yourself, then for who? Hence, we're going back just to the olden culture, which unfortunately in the Western world has been minimized. But the
Yes.
clan value level 2, having clans, the community, similar to Greece,
Yeah.
similar to the Aboriginals, they still carry that inheritance. It's a heritage for them. It's absolutely phenomenal. They live long lives. Why?
Yeah.
Why? It's
Yeah.
the village, it's a clan, it's the value of connection and purpose. And as you said
Mm.
earlier, and it's so true when you watch these documentaries and just to see the longevity of life and why it lasts so long, you're not going to
Yes.
work at the age of 80 and 90, but you are
Yeah.
still awake every day with a purpose because I want to make a meal for my great great grandkids.
Yes.
They want to see me there. They want to hear my wisdom. So I've got a reason to wake up. I move. I go down, get the groceries while they're at school. So when they come, I make, they have less things to do and we can all sit on the dining table together. That's clan level two. The values number two, the old fashioned cultural community, which we unfortunately now lack in society in the Western world.
Yeah.
You know,
And the other thing that those communities have, and again, look, sometimes when I bring things up, I'm not necessarily arguing for it, but just saying that that was just the truth at the time, and there's the advantages to it. And they didn't have as much choice as in, you were born. Back in the day, if you were born into a village, you were born and you were going to have a fairly specific role in that village, or if you were part of a tribe or whatever, and that role might have been that you were going to be the healer, or you were going to be a wife and mother, or gatherer, or you were going to be
the
what do you call the
provider
people that
or
go out to war, go out and hunt and gather, go and fight battles or whatever it is, a warrior or something, right? And in some ways, like obviously as a woman living in 2025, I really appreciate how far we've come and that we have choices and that we have options and all things. So I'm not arguing necessarily against that. In saying that, though, there was something about the simplicity of that. And now we've made our lives so complicated. So, like, we've gone to the nth degree of complication. And when you look at our society at the moment, and when you look at the issues with physical and mental health at the moment, you cannot tell me that making things that complicated overall has been a good thing. It's
so
just,
it's very interesting you say that because we've overstimulated ourselves, created
yeah,
so many things to make life easier, which has
yes,
created the complications of the mind because we haven't been built to have everything easy.
yeah,
The saying that says, hard times create strong people,
yes,
strong people create easy times, and then easy times create weak people. And then, unfortunately, the cycle begins again because these weak
yes,
people create hard times for their families. And those
yes,
families that have come out from hard times cycle back and become strong, which create easy times for the weak people. And it's just a cycle, right? But when you look at
yeah,
the faculties we have, look at us having this conversation. Who would have known in
yes,
2025 we can be live, you and I have a camera in front of me, one of these speakers, and have this flow conversation while you're in another place completely far from me, right? Such
yes,
an easy flow. But it's
yes,
created timidness. It's created restrictions. As much as it looks like it's freedom, it's actually
mm,
restrictness because now our creative side of our minds are no longer functioning because everything. Well, classic example, Chat GPT. Now you don't have to think what to say.
yeah. Yeah, and I like the number of young people who've asked me questions that they could just Google. I'm like, fair income. I grew up when you had an assignment, you had to go to the library or had to
So
refer to the Funk and Wagnalls encyclopedias that we had that were probably 20 years old. And these people, all they have to do is
what
like just
about
Google,
it?
and they still ask the question because it's too hard to Google.
No,
It's just
it's
weird.
too hard to comprehend because they haven't
Yes.
exhausted the ability to flick through things to capture
Yeah.
the information. Another classic example, the GPS. Do
Yes.
I'm curious to know, Gen Z, do they remember the routes to where they go? Or is
Yeah.
it always
Yeah.
relying on a GPS? So a part of
Yes.
your brain is no longer functioning. Now, if we
Yeah.
have high functioning back in the clan two values of villages, highly
Yes.
functioning for survival, and now these great things that have been explored and added to our life to make it easier, but now we're low functioning people, which only can create dis-ease because
Yes.
we're not active in our minds, in our language. I'm sorry, but back in the days when dis-ease started to show up a little bit more and more, what was happening? Life was getting easier.
Yes.
We weren't
Yeah.
as busy. We now are more tired than ever. We are now more exhausted than ever. We're now more stressed than ever. Hold on a second. We
Yeah.
missed the whole concept. We've
Yes.
made our life easier so we can enjoy life, not to run in it further.
Yeah, yeah. And when you actually look at a lot of disease concept, and this is going down a whole other, and we could do it for hours, but we won't. But when you look at the things like how much the body clock and hormonal regulation and living with the body clock and all of that relate to health issues, what we know is that when you wake up in the morning, you should have high levels of cortisol. That is completely normal, and the reason you have high levels of cortisol is because you need to go out and hunt and gather. And then in the evenings, you should have high levels of melatonin because that's when it's time to sleep. And so we have these circadian rhythms, and when we move out of them, which we do in modern life because of lights and 24-hour life and shift work and all of the other things, we've moved completely away from that. And I've talked about that in more detail in other episodes, sort of what that is and what that means. But essentially, when we've moved away from that and we've sort of lost that sort of whole circadian rhythm and the hormones all change and everything, well, that is a big part of why we have so much dis-ease and disease and issues. So we've moved away from that, which was living in a natural cycle. And I know I forgot where I was going with that. I was talking about how it causes disease and how that's associated with disease, but I was tagging on from what you had said. What had you said before that made me go into that? I'm trying to.
I was just saying how we've created such a simplicity of life, making things easier, but it's only
Yes.
cognitively bringing our intelligence down,
Yeah, that's right.
invites the
Yes.
idea of dis-ease. Because, sorry, what
Yeah.
else are we going to attain now, right?
Yeah, yeah. So now I'm there.
Yeah,
It was the ease. It was basically making things easy. So if we get up in the morning and now we sit down and have a bowl of cereal, well, not that I do because I don't advocate a bowl of cereal, but you don't actually have to hunt and gather a bowl of cereal. So that's what I was sort of actively saying, because we've made it easier on ourselves. So instead of getting up and using that cortisol in the way that we should and going out and hunting and gathering, or an alternative these days would be go out and exercise, right? But instead of doing that, we get up and sit down in front of a bowl of cereal and with our
which has been
phone or,
processed,
you know.
Fiona. It's been processed. Sugar is
Yeah, yeah. So you can see kind of where, what has happened here. Look, this is obviously a big topic, and it has been really interesting talking to you about this today. Now, obviously, there's, we might have to have a part two and talk about something else. But is there anything in particular that I've missed in regards to our topic today that you really think it's kind of just worth mentioning before we go?
I just feel that for everyone that's listening to this, just parking the idea of judgment and just being a little bit more open mind to question yourself.
Mm,
Question, where is this coming from? What is my purpose? And if you don't know your purpose, go and help someone, because through that help of other people and that contribution, you find your own inner purpose. And the reason why I say this is I think it's really essential for our dis-ease and comfort of within ourselves, just to get a little bit out of our zones, and it gets us to rewire our mind frames again and again and again through others, and just creating that connection within our community, so we can have that sense of fulfillment and purpose when we wake up every day, which then
mm,
essentially shrinks parts of this ease, because we have a reason now to get up.
yeah.
So sit with yourself, notice where you're at. What do you really want in life? And when I say what do you want, we're not talking about cars and houses.
Mm,
What do you really want? If there was no existence of anyone in the world, you and I, Fiona, I don't even exist in this conversation. It's just you. Would you have what you have? Sit with that, ponder over it. Would you dress the way you dress? Would you speak the way you speak? Would you own what you own? I wonder how would you shift and move in life? Sit and ponder with these types of questions. Based on that, you can find your authenticity, your inner self, which then distracts and moves and shifts dis-ease, because that's the inability of believing beyond that focal vision, right? It's a box, as you were saying before, with one of the Harvard University's surveys that they did. It was very boxed, right? People were very boxed. They were honed into smaller particles. Well, in order to expand beyond that, think of yourself and nothing but yourself in this world. Who are you? What do you want? And then based on that, that's a form of reframing when you come back up to show up into the world, the appearance that you give, so it can be aligned with your inner self. And then that can be part and parcel of your healing journey with the disease
yes.
that you could be having right now, or maybe underlying that hasn't shown up yet.
Yes.
Not giving a
Yeah. And I
suggestion that it's going to show up. No suggestions, please don't accept it as a suggestion.
And I suppose something to remember as well in regards to what we've been talking about is right here, right now, you're alive. And regardless of whether you've had diagnosis or not, or where you're at in your life, you're alive right now. And now's the time to live. We need to live while we're alive.
And live well. Live well.
Yes.
Connect well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Connect. You know, there's a book that says the 5 regrets or something of life. You know, it discusses that. What
Yes.
would be your 5 regrets?
Yeah, yeah, and people don't regret not having a Ferrari or whatever. That's not then when they're at the end of their life, they're not talking about Ferraris and houses and things like that. That's
Absolutely
just
not.
I've never heard a story where people are talking about those things, not once.
They regret.
But they are talking about connection and what actions that they wish they took, or people that they wish they'd said certain things to, or they're the kind of themes, aren't they?
100%. It comes back down to human connection, no matter how you turn the story. The main
Yes.
regret is, I wish I didn't say this. I wish I said that. I wish
Yeah.
I said sorry more often. I wish I didn't study as hard as I did, which distracted me from the connections at home, for instance.
Yes.
Just a classic example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we could talk about this forever. However, we won't, not this time. But it's been great having you on. And look, if people want to contact you, where can they find you?
Pretty much everything's shown up on our website. So just www.beyondnlpcoaching.com.au. It's got everything, our socials,
Okay.
workshops, and everything that we run.
Okay. So we'll also put the appropriate links into our show notes. Look, thanks again, Sarah. It's really been great having you on today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And for those of you watching or listening at home, please like, subscribe, and share this podcast. It's really important for other people to find out about all of the valuable things that we talk about here on this podcast. It's important that people find out about it. So please like, subscribe, share, and also rate and review the episodes so people find out more about our podcast, which is, what I aim to do here at the Wellness Connection is have important conversations about things that matter. So looking forward to seeing you all next week. Hope you have a great week. Thank you, everyone. And thanks again, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. Bye.